How's it going today, everyone? So this video was supposed to come out a few days ago, and I decided to give Gege one more chapter before break week. And this has to be the nail in the coffin into one of the worst handled fights I've ever seen. If you haven't seen the latest chapter, go read it, check it out, and come back to this. Basically, the grand finale to Hakari vs Uraume comes to an end after Sukuna is finally defeated. We then cut back to these two talking to each other, and then Uraume removes themselves along with Sukuna. And we see Hakari smiling, boasting about his luck now that they have won, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of this fight. Honestly speaking, are we really surprised that we got this type of conclusion after dozens of chapters with nothing really shown between these two? Absolutely not. That reality already set in once we found out Jujutsu Kaisen is ending in 4 chapters when you're seeing this video, with the last chapter dropping on September 30th. I'm sure most of us realized at that point what could have been such a cool fight to see take place between what seems like a perfect matchup. We knew not only would we not get any more action between them, but the ending would most definitely be dissatisfying. With, I guess, the only positive outcome is that Hakari is still alive, looking relatively unfazed, but personally I don't really see an excuse to how this fight was handled, especially when dealing with such a vital character such as Hakari. Even more so when he's going up against Sukuna's literal right hand man. It's so funny how looking back at this, it will give all the Hakari supporters PTSD. Like week after week for 20 chapters, so many people in the community were begging to see some action. You even had the biggest Hakari fans on YouTube giving up hope, and my guy Restless Gambler literally did not tweet for months. But yeah, back to the main topic at hand. I know that some of you, or at least one of you, will try to defend this by saying Hakari vs Uraume was only put into the story for the sole purpose of keeping them separated from Sukuna, and we don't 100% need to see it. And while that does make some sense, it doesn't excuse how it was handled. You're basically telling me if it has nothing to do with the main guy, it shouldn't be shown at all. So I guess you should also be implying that so many people's favorite side fights don't matter. Now, in a sense, I think that yes, two things can be true. This fight was put in to keep Uraume and Sukuna separated, but also was not shown how it should have been, especially when considering how important this fight is. Which is something I feel a lot of people failed to mention. If this fight had not taken place, the series would be over with very quickly. Pretty much everyone is getting frozen, and then Sukuna would just finish them off with relative ease. Uraume multiple times has had the lives of many people in their hands with no help already. So for sure, this is something that would have added to most people's enjoyment of the story, especially knowing the links these two needed to go to try and accomplish their goal, since Uraume was going 100% against Hakari. So I guess bouncing off of that, from Hakari being such a highly touted and praised character even from the likes of Gojo himself, and considering how vital he is to the endgame of this manga, it makes no sense for him not to be shown off consistently, especially in comparison to characters we see pop up in recent chapters. Yeah. First off, let's talk about the hype brought onto Hakari's character being built up all the way to the most recent arc, to where now he's almost being treated like a nobody. Gege really turned this man into a spectator. If we go all the way back to chapter 11, pretty much 250 chapters ago, Hakari's name is first brought up by Gojo, with Hakari and Yuta being praised the most upon the new generation, meaning Gojo believed for those two to have the most potential out of everyone. Then of course later on we get the famous quote of Yuta pretty much saying Hakari is stronger than him when he is at his strongest, which in turn sparked one of the biggest debates in the community. And finally, 2 more groupings we get with these two is Gojo picking Yuta and Hakari by hand if he only gets weaker than either of them, as well as the fact that Yuta, Maki, and Hakari were stated to be the heavy hitters of the remaining characters by Kenjaku. Also, please keep in mind, me bringing up Yuta and Hakari so much is not to debate who's stronger, as that's really not even a debate anymore. It's mostly just to show that wherever Yuta is, Hakari is usually mentioned in the same conversations as him. So when people say he is not important right now, I can't agree, as to me that isn't what Gege has portrayed in this story. Clearly Hakari is 1, hyped up amongst the strongest, and 2, very clearly linked to Yuta, Maki, and others in terms of importance to the current story before this current fight, so it really sucks that we don't get to see more of that. No matter which way you look at it, from a story perspective, Hakari is extremely important, or just from a strength perspective, he was quite literally being put in the same conversations as Yuta. And this absolutely pays off for everyone else besides Hakari. I mean, even Todo came back doing some admittedly cool things, like the spamming of boogie woogies, which was pretty insane in the combination attacks with Yuji. Maybe I'm looking way too deep into it, Maybe this was what Hakari was always going to be. But in my 100% honest opinion, I do believe Gege possibly had to shift how involved Hakari was going to be for some reason due to changes in the story he decided to make. Who really knows if Gege was being rushed or he really just wanted to meet this deadline date? Some will bring up the decision not to include the merger as a reason, which okay is fine I guess, but that's something that hasn't happened and in fairness didn't need to, whereas this is something that has. I wasn't even asking for chapters on chapters of this fight, but just here and there throw us into a couple of moments of what's going on, especially during that time when all of these characters were coming in to fight Sukuna back to back. That would have been such perfect timing as there isn't really an insane amount of lore being dumped onto us, just more to try and dwindle Sukuna down bit by bit. Which, by the way, I personally did enjoy. I know there's a lot of people who dislike the quote-unquote Sukuna cycle, but like, it made sense to me. The same way it made sense Madara fought so many people back to back, it's literally a gauntlet of the final main villain. It's really not that hard of a concept to grasp. But yeah, I do think it was a missed opportunity not giving us much of anything to do with Hakari versus Uraume in this moment. That's pretty much the end of my yap session on this. Obviously, I don't hold his importance 100% to the likes of Yuta, Maki, and of course Yuji, but never would I have thought he would be neglected this much. Like I said, some of you may feel a different way about Hakari, but that's just how I'm feeling. Now let's talk about what has actually gone down between these two, and why I was actually pretty hyped to see this fight take place. First of all, let's look at Hakari and Uraume individually from their power set as well as their personalities. On one hand, you have Uraume, who is kind of like your standard deadpan evil character that really most of the time we see them interacting with others. There definitely is a superiority complex being displayed, looking down upon many different characters such as Choso, Yuji when Sukuna was still in his body, as well as Hakari himself during their current fight, only really bowing down to Sukuna as the only person they serve. This makes her one of the more deadly characters to go up against in the series, as had their loyalty to Sukuna not existed, many of our favorite characters in this series would have been long gone due to of course her overall power set of ice abilities, with characters like Yuji, Choso, and Maki's lives being in her hands, clearly being extremely strong in long range and AoE attacks. Then on the other hand we have Hakari, who is a highly charismatic character, especially when he is in fighting mode, also loving to trash talk and get under his opponent's skin, which makes his fight so enjoyable, which makes sense doing what he loves most, that of course being gambling. As every fight Hakari is in, there's always a risk he has to take to gain what he wants, which is Hakari's entire ideology. On top of this, he is very proficient in hand-to-hand combat, knowing how to attack or counter in most situations. This, with his ability to constantly heal from attacks, allows him to relentlessly keep smothering his opponent until he eventually just wins. So when I saw these two being put against each other, I thought it would be a perfect match. A long-range AoE type of fighter who hasn't shown the best hand-to-hand combat ability, versus someone who lives for hand-to-hand combat but lacks any range skill and has to get inside to make something happen. Now let's take a look at what actually happened between these two. In chapter 237 we see Hakari flying down to attack, and we already see the personalities clashing, in which Hakari immediately pops his domain and Uraume, as they always do, not really batting an eye. Next time we would see them is in a small panel in chapter 238, and finally the only glimpse of fighting we see comes in chapter 245, and what we got to see was really such a tease by Gege. It starts with them both flying through the air and Uraume freezing Hakari's arm, then breaking it off, only then for Hakari to instantly grow it back and slam Uraume into the ground, with Uraume giving us a little notion that Hakari's healing is the fastest in the verse. This is followed up by Hakari getting ripped open, healing, then kicking Uraume straight in the mouth. It was at this moment Uraume knew this wasn't really going to be a normal battle and put a little respect on my boy Hakari's name, confirming to us it was time to go all out, ending off this chapter with Hakari getting even more hyped. Now y'all cannot tell me this little glimpse of the fight we saw was not fire, but sadly this clear perfect matchup was never shown in action after this, only shots of them pretty much just standing there until Sukuna was defeated, pretty much cementing this fight as one of the bigger fumbles I've seen in a while. Yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on how Hakari has been handled in the closure of Jujutsu Kaisen. It really is what it is at this point, but since we got the confirmation the series is actually ending relatively soon, I wanted to talk about it, as everyone else is mostly talking about Nobara's return and of course Sukuna's defeat, which is perfectly fine. Those are the most surprising and relevant events right now, as Hakari and Uraume's ending was pretty much expected after a while. Another reason I guess is this topic topic is a little more personal to me, as Hakari is one of my favorite characters in the series, which I guess you can say I'm biased, which is fair because I definitely am, but I really just wish we got to see such a cool character show out in the final arc. But yeah, like I said, it is what it is. Also, a quick disclaimer, this video is pretty much a ramble slash rant of my thoughts, so don't really take it super seriously. Anyways, we'll see how the story unfolds of these last 4 chapters or so. If you like the video, like the video, subscribe if you want. That's all for me. Peace.